We're back in time again, and this is we're still in the last issue of the 1977 November-December of BassMaster magazine. And again, I just kind of, due to every one of these, kind of provoke different things in me to think about and bring back interest. Some of them are personal, and a lot of you probably can't totally relate to them. But it's really about the evolution of the sport and how, you know, if you don't understand why certain things are going on nowadays, hopefully this kind of introducing you to this slow evolution that you'll, oh, okay, that's why that happened. And but the issue here is kind of strange. There's not been a bass fisherman out there that has not looked like that in one way, form, or fashion, because especially in the South, we fish, 12 months out of the year. And occasionally you'll get the freak stuff down there where you look like that. And ironically, my first time I looked like that was at St. Johns River in Florida. And of course, I was never been to Florida. And I thought, you never got cold in Florida. And it snowed. And running across the lake the first morning of the tournament, the water would fly up, and just like that would freeze on your face. It would come through the air and freeze while it was in the air. And this was Florida, so I understand this picture. Most people probably don't. And there's some other interesting things. I mean, I've met some incredible people that you may know about, you may not know about. And this one here is one that I bet a lot of you do, but a lot of the young people don't. Maybe they know Bobby Murray because he won the Classic, but he had a twin brother named Billy. And probably more than any individual that I know, especially early on in the sport, became a true teacher of the sport. And one of the tools he used, and he was the very first one that used it, he created this tank that you could sit up there on top of, and you see them everywhere now. If you go to any kind of bass fishing show or boat show, somebody will have one of these tanks, and they have fish in them, and you sit up there and you cast and you teach. And Bobby was a great teacher. Him and Jerry McInnes did a lot of things together in that teaching area. But I remember one of the first times Billy and Bobby asked me to come do one of these courses in bass fishing from their tank, and they were always outside, obviously. And people would be sitting in lawn chairs right here, and they would, 3 or 4 days before they did the teaching part up on this tank, they would stock it with fish. And the particular time I did it, we weren't very smart at that point in time about how to use the tank. I'll never forget it as long as I live. Is that I got up on the tank and it was full of fish, and it had one really big one in it. And people were in lawn chairs right here below the tank. And we didn't take the hooks off our baits. And I made it so, and I was talking about crankbaits, trying to teach crankbaits, and that 6-pounder ate my crankbait. And he proceeds to come up and jump completely out of the tank into a woman's lap, sitting down here. And we all were going, oh no, this is bad, because it's a treble hook crankbait. And it landed in her lap, and of course she started screaming. And fortunately for us, it jumped out of her lap without hooking her. So from that point on, we always cut the hooks off. And we actually backed the people away from the tank a little bit, because even without hooks, you don't want a 6-pounder landing in some kid's or some lady's lap below. But these really were really effective tools to teach people, because they could actually see the reaction of the fish, and the way your bait lure was working. So it was really a neat time, and I was glad to be a part of it. But again, I'm just kind of, Billy was one of the greatest teachers our sport has ever had. And again, you can see the full length of the tank here a little bit better, but most of you now have seen these kind of tanks. And then, of course, Bass Pro Shops started actually building a similar deal inside their stores that they had people get up and teach from. So again, this is just a part of the evolution of the sport, and encouraging people to get more involved in the fishing part. Okay, now we're back to the cover here, and how a lot of the people, literally dressed up on these cold, chilly, windy days, and you running a bass boat, and I mean, that looks like an alien of some type right there, coming out of a spaceship. But it was something that you didn't want to do, because hypothermia was a real thing. Frostbite was a real thing. And here's these crazy guys out there fishing in the worst weather in the world. And, and you trying to figure out how to stay warm, stay covered. So that was part of my reason for staying in my camper and all that kind of stuff, is because my body over time acclimated to it. And even though sometimes it would be that severe, I wouldn't feel it near as bad, because I was staying in it all the time. I rarely went into a warm motel room. I was in my camper with no heat, And in fact, one of my favorite stories, and I've told this before, so forgive me, but this Larry Nixon won tournament, and it was 23 degrees that morning when we woke up, and I happened to be camped pretty close to the boat ramp. And I get out of the boat. It's not even a camper. It's just a truck, camper shell that goes over it. And I had a wooden board for a bed in the back and a futon. But that's where I stayed. Sometimes you'd wake up in the morning and you'd wipe the frost off the inside of your windshield. And I'd get out. And one morning, Larry Nixon one time he saw me and said, "How in the world do you do that?" And I looked at him and I said, "Larry, it's going to get better for me today. The high temperature is only going to be 40. It's going to get 20 degrees better for me today. You came out of a 75-degree motel room. It's not going to get better for you." Because that's part of my, and I was more acclimated, because I didn't go back and forth from a 25, 35-degree weather to 70-degree motel rooms, for 12 hours of the day. I stayed in the weather and kind of acclimated along with it. Oh, this is again me trying to act like I knew something. It was what's important in a bass boat. And you got to remember back then, I just got one of the biggest sponsors from Glastron Boat Company of any angler at that point in time. I just won, the 76 Classic and the 77 Bass Champs tournament. And they came again. I've told you, my sister got me this sponsor. She lived in Austin, Texas, where Glastron Boat Corporate was. And she knew a lot of the people there. And this is some of you will relate to this. Most of the bass boats, and again, the evolution of bass boats came from this stuff. Most of the guys that built bass boats, especially the modern day bass boat now, came from boat racing. Roy Regel, he was one of the service guys from Mercury that came along. Earl Bentz started Hydrosport, and then eventually Triton and several other companies. He was a racer. This is Earl Bentz right here when he was young, and he was a boat racer. And so many, Gary Klaus, and even like Ranger. Ranger probably the most well-known racing, fastest bass boats I've ever seen were the Allison craft, and they were boat racers. So it's Roy Regel. He was a mechanic that came to the tournaments to service the tournament guys, and I learned more from him about how to run a boat than anybody probably I was ever around. And I remember one time getting my boat serviced on, and it was in the middle of the day. I'd had some type of problem, and I brought my boat in, and practice was going on. And Roy would be working on my boat, but he'd be listening to other boats running down the lake in the middle of practice. And he would tell you, he would almost tell you, okay, that guy, I'll see him soon. Because it's like, for example, this guy was running down the lake and just hitting the tops of every wave. Well, what happens is your prop comes out, so it revs up. And then you hit the water and it revs down. And he comes out of the water and it revs up, and then it revs down. He said, and he said something I always remembered after that. He said, Rick, remember, RPMs are like heartbeats. You don't got but so many of them. Don't use them up, use them wisely. And I never will forget that. RPMs are like heartbeats. You only have so many of them. And every time that guy was jumping out of waves and they speeded up, they were wasting a bunch of RPMs. Again, this is an evolution, and it's showing all these boats, and more of them are turning into these high-speed boats. And again, I brought up Roy Regional. This reason I turned to this page, but he was a racer himself. He raced boats, but then he became a mechanic for Mercury Motors, and I was glad to have him be part of my life because he really taught me a lot about how to preserve your engine and how to use it wisely. And here's a really, dang it, I forgot something here. Uh-oh. And that is new bassing brainstorms, okay? I had gone to work after I won the Bass Champs, Abu Garcia asked me to come to New York City. And they put the first thumb bar on a casting reel. And I'm the reason they did.
It's right behind you.
And I've got it right on the shelf someplace.
Right behind Brooke and Courtney's picture.
There we go. And I know if you read the article, it doesn't say a thing about me. But they asked me how could they improve the 5500 Garcia 5500C. And I thought it was the best. It was made in Sweden at that time. It's like a watch.
Your notes in the book.
And then I'd forgotten all about it. And I said, well, why can't you get away from this little button on the side and make a thumb bar where your thumb already is at? And they did. And this is the story about that. And eventually, shortly, very quickly, every casting reel on the planet had a thumb bar. No longer were you using two hands or something to create that. And I know me just saying that I'm the one that really that ideal came from.
Why don't you read the note?
And anyway, but here I got a letter from the innovator of.
It's right here.
Yes, and I'm getting a lot of help here. But
I didn't even remember the book.
I lost my glasses, so here I'm being a little awkward. I apologize. This morning I got this book in 2011, and in it was a note. Dear Rick, it is now many years since we hired you for the Abu Garcia. Even if I left the company, even if I left the company in 1981 to do other things, I have followed your continued success. When I last year was invited by Johnny Morris to go with him to the northern part of British Columbia to fish for steelhead, we talked about how you helped introduce the thumb bar to Ambassador. A few years back, I wrote a book about Abu in Swedish. It was a hard copy, quite elegant, and sold out in months. I was then asked mainly by collectors to make an English version. I did that in paperback. It also sold out. The other day, I talked to a publisher and found out that they still had a dozen books. I am mailing you a signed copy as I think you deserve that more than most people. I just want you to know I will still remember you and follow your success. And this again was Lou, and he was the original person, that started the Abu Garcias. And I I appreciate it because I had actually forgotten this whole story myself. And now you can't hardly buy a casting reel anymore that doesn't have that thumb bar. So this is when it first happened, was 1977. And that's actually his full name. I can't pronounce it, Lou Bergstrom.
Got me.
And, but it was, it's part of the history and evolution of the sport. And I wish I'd been a better businessman and had talked him into us patenting that dang thing, because every reel in the world has one now, has that thumb bar deal. But I wasn't. These were some, it's just curious, it's interesting things here, but anyway, this girl, she had lost her ring, and the ring was lost, then found in the stomach of 2 fish. Now you're gonna have to think about that a little bit. But the point of this is that a bass would eat anything. They found this inside a bass and all of that. But anyway, what had happened...
Oh, driftwood?
Yeah, but what had happened, a fish had eaten it, and another fish had ate that fish. And somebody caught that bigger fish, and when they took them out, they found the ring inside the little fish that it had just eaten. And it was returned to her. Kind of amazing. Yeah, and it's just like I said, I mean, you can go through all kinds of ones. One guy eventually caught a fish, and he was so fat he couldn't believe it, and he opened it up, and it had a squirrel inside it. And you know, there actually a cartoon came out about that one, where it shows, it was a commercial where it shows a body of water and a log laying out on it. Okay, and all of a sudden it shows this little fish fin come up and put an acorn on top of the log. And then it goes away, and then here comes a squirrel, hop, 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 and he eats the acorn, and the bass goes, So that's where that little cartoon came from, was this guy's catching and finding a squirrel inside. That kind of completes our 1977 years in the BassMaster magazine.